Hello, everyone. Happy to have all of you on today's program where we're going to be focusing on the buyer and seller trends. We'll be looking at some fresh data released by the National Association of Realtors. I took some time to read through all 145 pages of the report, and I have brought some highlights together in today's program. As I have said for many years, real estate is really much more about the real estate consumer than the actual houses themselves. And while it's important to understand market stats like price and days on market and list to sell ratios, ultimately what truly matters is who is buying and selling and how we can connect with them and adjust our sales and marketing and relationship management plans to create the opportunities we need to grow our business, but also to serve customers and clients all around the world. So, as always, we appreciate the opportunity to share these ideas, not just the data, but some strategies for leveraging them. I also want to thank all of you who are in today's program, but we do have some guests here today. So I just want to point out there are over 150 posts in the system. So if you're just checking it out, if you're in the trial phase, we encourage you to consider upgrading. We have monthly, annual, and insider level subscriptions. You can just scan that QR code and you can upgrade from there. And so all of the resources that we have on there would be available to you. Many of the resources you'll be able to check out the first half of anyways as a free member, but it's when you upgrade that you get all the extra goodies, including all the digital downloads and past recordings, plus free seats in all of our webinars. So that's just an opportunity to continue to learn live throughout the year. All right, let me tell you about the source of the data. As I've already mentioned, this is an overview of the key takeaways of a very extensive report. It's over 140 pages, so there's tons of stuff that I am not even going to be able to touch on today, but you really would be well served to read the whole report and keep it handy throughout the year. The place to find it is on the URL at the top. It's the National Association of Realtors Annual Profile of Home Buyers and Sellers. The 2025 edition is at the Research and Statistics URL of the NAR site. Let me just add one other caveat here, which is while this data is national in its perspective, many state association of realtors actually take the same data set and then just pull out the local relevant data and create a subversion of this report. So if you're logging in from Tennessee, your state association of realtors may have a Tennessee version. If you're logging in from Colorado, the Colorado Association may have a subset of this data. It's going to be the exact same charts. All they do is pull out the responses from people who indicated they were from your state. Now, if you really want to get excited about consumer data, you would also consider what kinds of questions might you start surveying your own customers and clients about at a company level, if not just a personal level, because this would allow you to, again, add an even deeper insight as to how the people you are working with correspond to the general buyer and seller trends in your state and nationally. There are going to be all sorts of similarities. There'll be also some interesting exceptions as well. So I think, again, as you look at data and you get excited about what it can teach us in order how to be more effective with our business, you start to see the opportunity to do this nationally, at a state level, and then even individually or as an individual firm. Now, to be clear, I just want to point out that this data is actually a combination of 2024 and 2023 data. The way they run these reports is a little funky because we're receiving this data in November. So what they do is they run them from July to June. So what we're going to see is data that is comprised of people who did buy and sell through the first 6 months of this year and did buy and sell through the last 6 months of last year. So you're really getting a year-long trend, but it's a little bit of 2023 trend and a little bit of 2024 trend. Now, to be clear, in some years, that can actually skew the data. Remember the pandemic, where if we looked at data from 2020 to 2021, it was very different because of massive change. We also saw that in 2022, when interest rates precipitously dropped in 1 year, in one 6-month period, we saw massive changes in the data. I can tell you, however, however, that the 2023 rolling into 2024 data is very consistent. And that is because the general economic environment and social environment, things that drive people's buying and selling, didn't radically change. So just keep that in mind. But this isn't only 2024 data to predict next year. This actually takes us back into 6 months of the previous year. This is a large survey. 167,000 sampled requests went out, and they received back just over 5,000 responses. So the cool thing here is that it's a fairly good response rate of 3% on this survey. And the key is that it's people who actually did it, who actually bought and who actually sold. So that's what we really want to know about, not just people who will randomly answer a survey on a website somewhere, but people who actually got the job done. Let's not delay any further. Let me tell you what the big takeaways are for this year's report. I'm going to just give you the absolute major changes, major highs, major lows, and then we'll break it down into 3 segments of buyers, sellers, and even for sale by owners, because we actually do study people who did not work with real estate professionals to understand a little bit of their behavior as well. So these are the big takeaways from the NAR annual profile of buyers and sellers. Let's start with the buyer big takeaways. Here they are. First of all, first-time home buyers hit an all-time low of 24% of all buyers. This is an important statistic to keep in mind when it comes to your marketing plan, and we'll get deeper into that in just a moment. The median age of all buyers was 38, also an all-time high. Buyers are older than ever if they're actually transacting in the marketplace right now. Repeat buyers also reached an all-time high of 61 years of age. So I just want to clarify here before we go any further. We're talking about a marketplace that is being driven by baby boomers. So the vast majority of buyers were repeat buyers. I'll show you that data in just a moment. And the vast majority of those people were in their 60s. That really is telling us that the market is being driven by a very strong baby boomer demographic. And that has a big impact on the kinds of marketing tools we use, the kind of messages, the kind of concerns that they would have. And these are all-time highs. So we have not in the past 40 years worked a market that looks anywhere close to this whatsoever. The all-time low that corresponds to the all-time age high is that pretty much only 1 in 4 buyers last year, or buyer households, had children under the age of 18. So these are not people who are running around worried about the elementary or high schools. They may have had children in their 20s at home, but the survey stops, it cuts it off at 18 because typically the school system issue is generally most important to buyers when it is elementary school and high school. Going off to college is not a housing decision for most buyers in the past. The good news on top of all of this, though, is pretty much 9 out of 10 buyers worked with an agent, 88%. That is a great number, a very stable number over the past few years. They took about 10 weeks to look around through the market and to make an offer that got accepted. That's 2.5 months, so let's just keep that in mind. And a number that is stable year over year, but still an all-time high average, is the amount of time they spent in their previous home before moving again, which was 10 years. Now, remember, that's hugely skewed because we have more repeat buyers than first-time home buyers, although technically first-time home buyers, if they're young, may have lived at home the previous 10 years. And so overall, most people are not transacting more frequently than once a decade, which is a big change in the last 35 years. I've been in the business where for years we taught people to expect a transaction every 5 to 7 years. Finally, I'll just point out that most buyers were very satisfied with the experience that they had. 92% said that they were very or mostly satisfied with their experience with their agent. So those are the big takeaways. We're going to go deeper into a lot of these in just a moment for buyers. Let's do the same thing for sellers. What were the big ahas in the seller data for the last 12 months? If you expect that the buyers were at the highest age, that is because many of them were sellers. sellers. And so the typical age of a seller last year was also a baby boomer age of 63, also the highest in the last 4 decades. So however you slice this market, 3/4 of it is baby boomers making the moves. About 7 in 10 were married couples, and we'll see that later reflected in household income, partially because of the cost of housing. As housing costs have risen, you need to have more than 2 incomes, a certain level of household income to be able to do it, and married couples command that income. And of course, baby boomers decreasingly would have fewer and fewer children under the age of 18 at home. 77% did not. Most sellers sold their property for 100% of the asking price. That does not mean that there weren't price reductions. We will see that. But by and large, homes sold for what they were asking to be bought at. That is also the highest since 2002. They spent an average of 3 weeks on market, so it is still a very fast marketplace. Remember that this data cuts off in the summer of this year. We've seen that grow a little bit more in the 3rd quarter of this year, but we are still in a very fast inventory shortage driven marketplace. 9 out of 10 of sellers worked with an agent as well at 88%. As we just said, they stayed in their home an average of 10 years. They were very satisfied with their experience. And of all the sellers who transacted in the survey last year, only 6% of them were able to do it as a for sale by owner. And that is the lowest number since 1981. So it's a really big number, and it tells us a lot of things. We'll talk about that when we cover FSBOs later. But one of the things it tells us right away is that for all the cool tools that apparently consumers have to use all by themselves online, they're not doing it by themselves. And I want you to recall that, because this summer, when the media was going crazy about the value of a real estate professional, and you probably read lots of comments by consumers who said, oh, I don't need a realtor, I did it on my own. Bottom line is, nobody's doing it on their own. So don't take the exceptions for the rule. Selling your home on your own, exception, not the rule. Most people don't want to perform surgery on themselves. Most people want to sit in the back of the plane, not drive it themselves. And most people need great help and appreciate it and are highly satisfied by it at 90% when they sell their home. Those are the high-level takeaways. Some pretty big highs and some pretty low lows. What we need to now do is get deep into the behavioral patterns of people who actually bought and sold. So let's start by going in depth on buyers. I believe that this is an area that has really shifted dramatically in the last year. Remember also that the data on buyers that we're talking about here is research that was done before the final settlement terms of the National Association of Realtors lawsuit. And so the changes in buyer behavior in the last 12 months may look a little less than they will next year, but they are certainly going to still reflect some significant demographic and behavioral patterns that have been brewing for a long time. Let's start with the big one, the average age of buyers. Here is the average age chart going back to 2016. The data point is only good when we see it in a trend. The middle line is all buyers, and just starting right there, you can see that since 2016, all buyers have slowly and steadily been going up towards 56. That was the average of all buyers. Interestingly enough, you see a spike around 2021 and 2022. That's when interest rates spiked. And so clearly many of those first-time home buyers would have dropped out of the market at that time. If we go above, these are your repeat buyers. So people who either sold and bought or just bought a second home, heavily been in the baby boomer segment for pretty close to over a decade now. And so it's important to realize that this is a trend that has been brewing and is simply continuing right now. And of course, the bottom line is the first-time home buyer, which has crept up in age simply because of the skew in repeat buyers towards the baby boomers. But in addition to that, the decrease in percentage of people who were buying for the first time, meaning less young people are in the data. So less people in their 20s and 30s are buying. So the skew is going to happen because of all the reasons first-time home buyers have been restricted from the market, lack of inventory, rising prices, mortgage affordability, down payment difficulties, but also simply because what's happening is they're competing with more baby boomers who are continuing to buy and sell homes well into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And 15 years ago, we were all talking about when the baby boomers were going to retire and sell their homes. They're doing it right now. What they're also doing, however, is they're buying another home. And as a result, it is keeping the market afloat in some ways, but it's also keeping now the market skewed towards baby boomers. Why do we care? I actually care because this has the most dramatic impact on my value proposition, the most dramatic impact on my marketing plan. The baby boomer profile is an age where it is more likely that they are interested in receiving information by text than TikTok. So when I think about who's buying, that tells me how I may wish to engage them. But it also tells me what I want to talk about. And talking about the local school system and talking about how many playgrounds are nearby may not be that big of a deal. And so just again, looking at the historical trend, it's not that far out of sync last year, but it is now at an all-time high across all three ages. So just something I think primarily that will drive our sales strategy for next year. We've already mentioned this, but let me just show you the inside details on kids under 18. Again, it is a historical low that buyers have children under the age of 18 when they are shopping. Basically, 12% had one child, 10% had two children, and 5% had three or more. So the average household size of buyers last year was really quite small, 1 to 2 children. 73% had none of them. Keep that in mind as you are helping them come to conclusions about certain features of the property and certain features of the neighborhood. You are talking to people who are being driven by very different family and household needs than in the previous decade when they did it the last time. Okay, now some of them, as you might expect, even without children, bought and sold with respect to children and family as well. We call that the continuing rise of the multi-generation household. So some buyers purchased homes for the consideration of people in their family moving in together. The multi-generational household purchase did rise to the highest in 5 years to 17%. So this is a pretty sizable chunk of people who are buying a home that is larger, even though they are in the baby boomer age bracket. And the reason they are doing it, you can see in here really clearly, 25% did it to take care of aging parents. And then down below, 20% had children who never left the home, and 21%, just above it, had children who are moving back into the home. So 4 in 10 of the multi-generational purchases were for children, basically over the age of 18. So 20-somethings and maybe older who are going to move back in with a mom and dad. And then 1 in 4 was to take care of aging parents. And let's not underestimate that 1 in 3 people did it for cost savings purposes. They moved into multi-generation to pool income in some cases. Lots of nuance in there, but when you're thinking about it, while there aren't a lot of reasons they might be interested in school systems and playgrounds, there still may be a lot of interest in larger homes for larger household sizes, because about 17% were a multi-generational driven needs. Now, in terms of ethnicity, the data stayed fairly close to the year before. The vast majority of buyers last year in the United States were whites. We also see that Black Americans continue to purchase at a fairly stable rate of 7%, the same as the last year. Hispanics were basically statistically the same, 7%, 6%. It's about the the same when you really are measuring data at this level. And Pacific Islander Asian Americans actually fell in terms of buyer activity last year, and it fell 2 points, which isn't statistically the same. That's actually a fairly significant shift. So for some reason, Asian Americans pulled back from the market last year at a fairly decent rate. The year before, 6% of buyers were Asian Americans. Last year, only 4%. Again, going to be very specific to certain markets where they have a significant population of Asian American, Hispanic Americans, and Black Americans. But overall, the numbers were mostly stable with just that blip in Asian Americans. The age of buyers is important, but other demographic factors also play in. And one of them is the education level of buyers. The people who are buying tend to skew towards college graduates and above, and we continue to see that in the data. These numbers, as a set, have been roughly the same for the past decade, but a little bit higher now on very higher education because of the increase in baby boomer activity in the marketplace. So 1 in 3 were college graduates with at least a bachelor's, but 1 in 4 had a master's degree, plus 7% had a doctoral degree. On the other end of it, still a very healthy number of about 1 in 3 who at least graduated high school and or community college associates level degrees here. So still a fairly educated consumer out there, skewing a little bit higher, again, probably directly related to the age. Now let's get a little deeper into that first-time home buyer segment. This is an area that's important for a number of reasons. One, a lot of new agents working with buyers tend towards first-time home buyers. They like to perhaps help people who are doing it for the first time. It gives them an opportunity to hone their skills with consumers who have a very predictable set of needs around how the process works and finance. And so I think there's a lot of reasons there. Also, the increase in younger real estate professionals means that many of them also tend to target first-time home buyers who are frequently younger. So it's birds of a feather. Basically, they are trying to help people in their own age group. Unfortunately, the percentage of first-time home buyers last year was the lowest since 1981. Now, 2022 came really close to it. So we're really looking at a multi-year phenomenon here. But if we roll this back to 2018, pre-pandemic, with a fairly decent market at that point, a marketplace where the numbers were 10 points higher, essentially, in terms of first-time home buyers, even though inventory was just as scarce and the pace of sales was roughly as brisk, we are seeing the impact of affordability, inflation, and other economic factors on this generation. And we're also probably seeing the impact of debt, because many first-time home buyers are college graduates, but they also have the highest levels of debt in the history of the country. So a lot of factors going into this. There are also just generational trends, as we saw. Basically, a third of them never left home or are moving back into home, so they're not buying on their own. If your marketing plan is targeting and communicating to first-time home buyers, emphasizing that, you'll want to keep a really good track on what's happening hyper locally to the first-time home buyer. Let's talk about the income of buyers at this point. Obviously, you're going to expect this number to be higher for lots of reasons. 32% of all homes last year were purchased in cash, so that has to come from higher income households. We found also that as the age of the buyer rises, the ability and the wherewithal of that household rises as well. It is not a secret to anyone on this call that somewhere around about 15 years ago, the baby boomer generation started slowly and surely retiring. So we started seeing approximately 10,000 baby boomers a day retiring. And baby boomers are the wealthiest generation in the history of the United States. So there's a ton of cash, a ton of equity, a ton of wealth in this generation. All of that, of course, is now reflected in household income. So here are the numbers. The first-time home buyers again, not unsurprisingly, have a household income of almost $100,000, up year over year. This is a direct reflection of what it takes to get an offer accepted and the job done in an era where in the last 12 months, inflation has been high, and so has the average cost of houses. Repeat buyers even higher, because that's where that 61-year-old average buyer is going to come right out of the baby boomer generation. And that income is interesting because this is income that is working age income, right? So they haven't retired. We're actually looking at baby boomers who are still strongly in the workforce. And this is a household that continues to generate significant revenue. That is affecting the prices of homes, but it's also affecting who can get into the market and succeed in it. All right, so those are some of the background information pieces, the demographics of buyers. Let's take a look at what they told us in terms of their motivations in the survey for entering into the marketplace. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, and I know it is, so I'm going to call out some of the big numbers for you to pay attention to. The number one driver for first-time home buyers really was simply an emotional one, the desire to own a home of their own. And I really want to emphasize that, because if you look up and down the chart, you can see there are other important reasons, maybe the birth of a child or a marriage or a divorce. So those are important in many ways, desire for a better area, but these are not major factors for first-time home buyers. No one is necessarily being driven, because those are almost statistical anomalies in some of these responses. Even if you look at job relocation or to be closer to job, school, or transit, we're talking 2% here. So if you look down that column, the number one reason people still choose to buy for the first time is totally emotional. It is just the desire for their own home. And when it came to repeat buyers, of course, the desire to own their own home wasn't the big deal. It was relative to that, though, in terms of being closer to friends, family, relatives, and the need for a larger home. Now, again, if you look on the right-hand side, that's basically 29%. 1 in 3 buyers were really driven, again, by sort of family or personal and emotional decisions. And we quickly fall down the ranks when we look at things like retirement, 8%, job-related moves, 7%. Now, those aren't small, but they're not the major reasons people are moving. And talking to them about being closer to friends and family is going to resonate far more than simply talking to them about practical reasons. It continues to prove to us that people are not practical when they buy real estate. They are emotional when they buy real estate. So these are big deals. And then our final arrow here is right here of all buyers: affordability of homes and financial security. Both of those are 2% apiece. So 4%, if you would add them up, financial security and affordability of homes were drivers of buyers. Now, to me, my friends, this is a big deal in the data. Why is this a big deal in the data? Because I don't know about you, but maybe you read some of the media around real estate on the internet. Maybe you're reading constant articles about the affordability of homes. Maybe you're reading constant articles about the interest rates. Maybe you're even producing articles and content and videos and text messages around all of that. Maybe people are talking about it in your office. But my friends, according to buyers, it's not a big deal. According to buyers themselves, they are not waking up going, oh, let's talk about affordability. Oh, let's talk about financial security. I'm sure they're talking about it. Don't misunderstand me. But it was not listed in the top reasons why people bought or sold. The top reasons continue to be desire. Look at the 4 out of 5 in the top 4 rows. Desire to own a home, desire to be closer to friends, desire for a larger home, desire for a smaller home, and a change in family situation. I'm emphasizing this only to say that sometimes what we talk about in this business is what we pay attention to in this business, right? We pay attention to it much more than the consumer does. And what the consumer wants is perhaps messaging and encouragement and support and insight into their emotions and their desires. And to be fair, you know this because when you go buy anything, the finances almost always come second. Have you ever bought a car and said, I'm only going to spend this much? And then you test drove a car and you blew your budget. No questions asked. You go to the department store and you say, I think I'll go buy a nice, responsible sweater. And you leave with a new suit, a hat, and a pair of shoes. Emotions drive transactions of all kinds. I just am emphasizing this because the data actually has said this all along, except that the real estate industry is obsessed with a lot of topics about which buyers are not obsessed. So just think about that. Just consider that. If you're not getting any traction and uptake on your latest newsletter on interest rates or affordability or anything like that, it could simply be because buyers go, yeah, so what? We've overspent for years and we'll keep overspending. We need your help on the other thing. So just keep that in mind if you really want to use this data strategically in terms of marketing and value proposition. I'm going to go a little deeper into that same data, just a slightly different chart. Let me show this one to you here. Again, this is a little bit of an eye test because if you put the chart on here, the text gets a little small. So I'll just read them off to you again. Number one reason, it was just the right time and the buyer was ready to buy a home. So if I look here at the very top of the chart, 43%, it was just the right time. 23% said, I didn't have a choice. I had to purchase. That could be all sorts of reasons: divorce, family circumstances, job relocation. And then the third reason was it was the best time because of availability of homes for sale, which a couple of you mentioned in the chat room when we asked. But the buyer wished they'd waited, 4%. It was the best time because of affordability, 4%. It was the best time because of mortgage finance options, 2%. So no matter how we ask buyers, they are buying when they're emotionally ready to do. They are not buying because of a slight fluctuation in interest rates. I don't know about you. To me, that's encouraging. I find that encouraging. I think a lot of agents spook themselves by saying, oh, no one's going to want to buy because interest rates are so high. Buyers don't seem to be saying that, at least not the buyers who are in the market right now with the wherewithal that they have and the motivations for moving forward. So just keep that in mind as you use this data strategically. So now we know why they're entering the marketplace. How do they shop, both for homes and for real estate agents? Let's take a look at their behavioral patterns for absorbing housing information and engaging housing professionals. Let's start with this chart, which is the top sources of information that buyers used to search for homes. Now, there's not a ton of surprises in here, but there's one major omission that surprised me, so I'll bring that up. But here we go. Good news is real estate agent continues to be the top of this list. So the number one source that people used for home searches was real estate agent. When we asked buyers over and over again, what do you really need help with? They said, we need help finding a home that we can afford and fits all of our needs. So real estate agent, still number one on the list, followed by, of course, a mobile device of some kind. So they had an app of some kind, followed by open houses. I don't want you to underestimate the power of open houses for buyers. Real estate agents might not like to do open houses. I've heard this for my entire career, but buyers love open houses. No problem going to open houses. No problem using them as a source to find the house that they want. 50% said it was actually the top three, one of the top three items they used for searching for a home. Online video, great news. Yard sign, still 32%, not a bad number in the age of everything is supposedly online. Obviously, new construction catches people's attention and has been more important than ever. New construction actually represents 1 in 5 sales right now in the United States. Yesterday, home builders put out new numbers showing that about 780,000 new homes so far have been sold this year. In an era of only 4.5 million sales, that's a big number, really. New construction and home builder is a big source for people. The rest of the sources, no surprise there. Newspaper, don't even know where you can buy one, let alone see real estate information in it. Home books or magazines, I don't know, maybe there's still a few of those printed. Billboards, relocation companies, television, low within statistical deviations here. But here's something that's missing from the chart. I want you to just look at the bottom here and jot this down. For some reason, the National Association of Realtors did not include the question of social media in their survey. I don't know what happened here. I don't know if someone just forgot or it didn't rank. Like it didn't even get in the top 15 here because it's not even on the list. But it tells me something. It tells me it's not in the top 10. It tells me it's not in the top 5. So social media is a powerful tool, and it is a powerful tool for certain kinds of work. But I got to be honest with you, friends. Posting listings on social media seems to be a non-thing to prospective buyers because it's not even in the top 10 information sources used for home search. So maybe posting the inventory on Facebook is less important to buyers. Now, it might be important to sellers because it makes them feel like it's another marketing tool that you're using. And I get it. Sometimes we do that. But frankly, it's a non-issue and a non-starter for buyers when they are shopping. So I just want you to keep that in mind as you are thinking about the best ways to help buyers access market information. Again, as I already indicated, what they really care about is how you will help them find the right home to purchase. Basically, 50% of all buyers said, that's my number one priority. 7% said, help me with the paperwork. That's a big deal too, because in the last year, we've been so worried about the paperwork. We've been so worried about whether buyers will be able to navigate forms and specific disclosures, et cetera. They don't seem too worried about that. Now, that again, this data is pre-settlement, so that may change going forward. They may be faced with new paperwork that is more daunting than ever before, but by and large, it's not the driver. Help buyers find the property they're looking for. Now, what about shopping for agents? What about you? How do they connect with you? The good news is the data is fairly stable. And the even better news is that the things most of you on this session probably do all the time are going to continue to serve you well. So again, a little bit of an eye chart here, a little bit of a deep set of data. So I'll break it down for you. But as you're not going to be surprised, I am sure the number one place that buyers found their agent continues to be their sphere of influence, which is your sphere of influence. Friends, neighbors, relatives, or the agent they worked with the last time. And I just got to say something here about that second number. The agent they worked with the last time is a big deal because remember, they haven't worked with an agent for 10 years. So if they lived in the home for 10 years, which was the average tenure, then the fact that agent is still in the business and the fact that agent has been keeping up with them, the fact that agent is still someone that they trust, they continue to trust, is a big deal. So I look at this, and I think of this as a huge win. Anybody who is building a relationship-based business is going to look at this and say, wow, 57% of buyers found their agent through their sphere, which is my sphere. So that's a big deal in terms of sources of where I would market and put my energy and put my money to continue to generate buyer business. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, again, saw the agent's social media page without a connection, meaning social media advertising, all the money being poured into social media advertising, it's 1%. No one's going on Facebook going, I think I'll randomly look at ads of agents and pick one. It's just not happening. No one's going on the internet and doing that either, because if you look at the top underneath friends and relatives, a used agent previously to buy a home, inquired about a property, the fourth item was website. So again, website without a specific reference means they Googled it. They did a search and found an agent online. It's only 6%. So only 6% of buyers basically searched the web for an agent, but 7% found their agent through a referral. And if I go even further, 5% found them at an open house or answered the telephone at 4% or answered an email. Oh, and speaking of choosing their agents, here's a number that is increasing year over year and critical to all of us. Most buyers interviewed only one agent. I don't know how to emphasize that enough. Most buyers are not going out there and asking to interview 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 agents and comparing all of their commission rates or experiences or anything like that. The bottom line is 75% of all buyers interviewed one agent. You see it right there. And only 19% of first-time home buyers interviewed two agents. And again, maybe that's because they don't have any relationships yet. They're first-time buyers, and so they're forging those relationships. And of course, repeat buyers in the middle, even higher in terms of the percentage that interviewed one agent. They interviewed the agent that they've known all along for the last 10 years and have stayed in contact with them. This tells me, friends, that while it's important to be the best, so don't ever underestimate that, it's also critical to be first. It's critical to be in flow with buyers so that when they raise their hand and they're ready to go, they know that you are right there for them. And last but not least, in our buyer data, let me just show you how loyal buyers are. 73% of buyers were satisfied enough to be willing to refer their agent or work with them again the next time. So you can see the table inset on the right-hand side. A very high number of people were referring their agent 2, 3, or even 4 or more times. On average, it was one time since buying, but don't underestimate that 29% of buyers, 1 in 3, had referred their agent 3 or more times to friends, family, neighbors, colleagues, etc. So buyers remain highly satisfied and willing to be a source of future business for you. Interesting stuff on buyers. Now let's do the same for sellers. Now let's take an in-depth look at sellers' behaviors and mindsets when it comes to people who actually sold homes and how they engage with our industry. So we're going to now break down some of the data around sellers, and let's start where we started the last time with buyers, which is taking a closer look at seller age. Again, we rewind the clock to 2018, take a look back at 6, 7 years worth of data, and we are seeing a dramatic rise in seller age. We really see the shift happen between year 2021 and 2022 and continue to grow in the baby boomer segment since 2022, since interest rates rose and inventory still remained tight. But don't fool yourself, because the average seller has been in their 50s and 60s and has been a baby boomer for more than a decade. So once again, what kinds of value propositions do they focus on? What kinds of needs do they have? What kinds of goals do they have? It is a baby boomer market and will continue to be for a very long time. It's reflected, as you'd expect, in the experience of the seller. So 76% sold 1 or more times in the past. Only 1 in 4 was a first-time seller. So this is important because they are familiar with the process. They may not remember it because it was 10 years since the last time they did it, but they are familiar with the sales process. That's something you can take for granted in terms of your marketing and your value proposition. Their household composition, as we've already said, did not have a lot of children at home. 77% no kids. 5% had 1 child. 9% had 2 children under 18 at home, and 9% had 3 or more. So believe it or not, the sellers skewed a little bit larger in terms of household size than the buyers did. Again, that's because they have first-time home buyers fed into that data, and there may not be any first-time home buyers with 3 or more children at home. So we could expect this with sellers. It's a reasonable interpretation. The profile in terms of ethnicity is very similar to what we saw in buyers. You would expect that since they make up a big percentage of the buyers. 90% of sellers were whites in America last year. Hispanics were 4%, Black Americans were 4%, and Asian Pacific Islanders were 3%. That number of 3% for Asian Pacific Islanders might explain some of the reason why there were fewer buyers in the Asian Pacific Islander population, because fewer of them were selling at that time as well. The big change, though, again, noticeable, but almost statistically the same, was in Hispanic sellers. It was 5% the year before, 4% this year. Again, 1% is almost a statistical anomaly, but it was the only movement in the chart year over year, was that slightly fewer Hispanic Americans were selling than they were year over year. And as we've said already, but I'll just show you the data around it, Everybody who sold last year had been in that house for a decade. The only year in which that significantly dropped was the hypermarket year of 2021. But if we look previous to that, we see 10-year tenures. That's a hard one to say, right? We see 10-year tenures extending back into 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014. We see that because it's the result of the financial crisis that we experienced in 07 to 10, somewhere around that period. You saw a lot of people just stay put. And then anyone who did buy or sell basically said, this is not a cash machine. This is not a rapid flip. I'm going to sit in that house for a while. They are sitting in that house. But the good news is that if 10 years is the average tenure, and there's a lot of them who started that in 14, 15, and 16, they are now coming due. So we can actually look forward and project the opportunity for a significant increase in seller activity simply due to this average tenure. We would have liked it earlier. The cycle would have been nice if it had repeated at 5 or 6 or 7 years. It's going to repeat at a decade. We're hitting that decade now since that first big rise happened after the previous financial downturn. Seller income, even with buyer income, not a surprise here, average at about 112,000. So again, looking at repeat buyers and first-time home buyers around 100 to 114,000 we just saw. This makes sense. But may I please point out to you that 59% of all sellers had an income above $100,000. I'm going to say that again. 6 in 10 sellers made more than $100,000. 1 in 5 sellers made more than $200,000. And folks, this is income. So this is telling you these are people who are still in the economy. This is not wealth. This is people who are still generating significant amount of annual income. And this is also what is driving the 32% rate of all cash offers, because you take that income level and you combine it with a massive equity proceed that comes from the sale of their existing home. They've got plenty of money to put down. And relatedly, they've got plenty of money to buy down their interest rate. So one of the reasons that many buyers aren't that worried about interest rates is because they are sellers first. They take their income, they take their equity from their high sales, and they buy down their interest rate. So what looks like a high interest rate in the newspaper is not a high interest rate in the final paper for people who can buy down a point or two. And so I want you to be clear about that. This really is driving the marketplace and potentially driving the mental mindset that interest rates aren't a big deal for the people in the market. It may be a big deal for pundits and people who'd like to be in the market, but for those people in the market, it is not a big deal. They are just using the equity and the income that they have. Now let's talk about why they sold. So if inventory is still scarce, if it's harder to find homes and there's a chance that if they sell, they'll be stuck for buying for a while, all those things seem to be headwinds. If they're also staying put because they have a low interest rate, you would see this as an impact in their motivation, but we don't. So again, I want you to be careful about what you think and what is actually happening. This is the chart of the top reasons why people sold last year. And again, at the top, the number one reason is friends and family. They either want to be closer to friends and family, or they have to buy up or buy down. They buy up in size. We saw the multi-gen housing data a little earlier. They buy down in size because still 1 in 10 of baby boomers are probably retiring. And so there's a personally driven reason for these kinds of changes to occur. So when I look at these, I'm saying to myself, okay, if it's such a big deal that baby boomers have such great mortgage rates, where does it rank? Where is it people saying that I was motivated to buy because of financial reasons? And it's just not there, my friends. The neighborhood was a top 10 reason. The moving due to retirement was a close to top 10 reason, but cannot afford mortgage or other expenses really just isn't there. And we're just not seeing it reflected in terms of their primary motivations. Once again, sellers are just as emotional as buyers because sellers become our buyers. It's a virtuous circle, and we want to focus on the things that matter to them. When you're building content and you're talking about your value proposition, I don't think the obsession in this business with interest rates is serving anyone, certainly not serving the interest of seller consumers. Now, here's an interesting data point that did jump out, and it is actually a uptick once again, and also a near historic high. But sellers are moving pretty far. And this is something that is a major change of the past 3 or 4 years compared to previous 2 decades. So if we look here, about 40% of sellers moved within roughly their own town, but 35% of sellers last year actually moved 100 or more miles. And if we think about this, 100 miles, 500 miles, 1,000 or more miles at 12% of sellers, this is a very high mobility. And this is an area where it may become more important than ever to understand the feeder destination market of your marketplace and understanding who's searching in your marketplace from 500 miles away. And do you have referral sources from that market? Do you have connections to real estate professionals in that market? So who's searching for homes in Chicago? Is it coming from the coast? Is it coming from inland cities? Is it coming from 10 miles away? Is it coming from 1,000 miles away? So understanding that a very high percentage of sellers are moving far is critical to understanding the kind of value proposition and needs that they have. All right, now when they sold, they also experienced certain things, and I think this is critical to helping us understand the patterns that sellers are expecting in the marketplace. Here's one aspect that I thought was pretty important. 65% of sellers did not have to reduce their asking price last year. So that's a big deal. As we said, most sellers experienced 100% match between the asking price and the offer that they accepted. 65% did not have to reduce the price. And basically 21% last year reduced it one time. The current data on that is 21%. The year before was 19%. So a tiny uptick in single time price reductions. And again, a fairly decent uptick in 2 or more price reductions. But if you add it up, you're still looking at 1 in 3 homes experiencing a price reduction. This means that a price correction is occurring, but it's not the kind of price correction that you see talked about in the press. This isn't a price reduction in the overall value of homes. It is a price correction in the initial asking price to the final asking price. That's just the market. Bottom line is 1 in 3 homes experienced a price reduction in terms of their initial asking price, something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about how the seller found the agent who helped them with that sale. Again, no surprises for any of us. Just like buyers, sellers are highly driven by their sphere of influence. Right here, we are looking at 66% of sellers who found their agent through friends, family, relatives, or again, worked with the agent who helped them buy or sell a home the last time. Still great news, still a relationship-driven marketplace. If you are looking to build your listing inventory, if you are looking to bring inventory into the marketplace, then look amongst the people you know, not the people you don't know. Don't go fishing for random sellers out there. Tap into the 66% of sellers that you already know. They are the ones who are most likely to enter the marketplace with your help. Again, we look at the bottom here with all of these 1%, 1%, 1%. No one's walking into the office. No one is randomly seeing a social media ad or a social media page and listing with that agent. Even certain things like direct mail are kind of low performing tools right now. This could be different in certain segments, but 2% around direct mail compared to personal contact. At least that's double when you really think about it. We look up here, direct marketing through telephone and email, as well as referrals, generating referral-based business is outperforming 2 to 1, direct mailings and physical handouts of some kind. So it's really critical to actually know what sellers did, not just what marketing could do. And it's increasingly expensive to market these days. So fine-tuning your marketing strategy to the actual behaviors of sellers can save you some money and create better results. And speaking of being more targeted, just like buyers, don't forget this. The average seller only interviewed one agent. Let me show you the data. Right here, 81% of sellers, identical to the year before. So that number has not budged. 81% of sellers interviewed one agent and then accepted that agent to help them sell that home. 15% interviewed two or more, and 6% interviewed three or more. So when we're really looking at this, we're not seeing a lot of people who are shopping agents, who are shopping commission rates. Now, I'll be fair, right? We're seeing a little bit of it, right? We're seeing 21% of people who are looking at two, maybe three agents. But by and large, the vast majority of listings are going to be found in a sphere of influence that has known you all along, stayed in relationship with you all along, and when the time is right, is going to work with you again. Maybe there's a little bit of comparison out there, and that makes sense because some sellers will find that their agent has left the business. So of course, there's going to be some sellers that might need to talk to two agents because they don't have a relationship anymore. If their agent left the business, no one's been keeping up with them. No one's been giving them annual updates on their property's value or the neighborhood or market conditions. So sure, it's sensible that a small percentage of people would interview more than one person. But by and large, they are not shopping agents. This is not a competition of commission rates or value propositions. It is a competition of relationship stamina. Stay in flow, you will stay in the business. And that's really where this number continues to be the same. And by the way, friends, I've been doing this for 35 years. I could show you that chart from 5 years ago. I could show you that chart from 25 years ago. It's the same. Great news, because with all the technology we've invented, it's easier to stay in flow, but it hasn't replaced us. And last but not least, when we ask sellers what they enjoyed and how they enjoyed it, and would that drive them to recommend their agent, a pair of charts here now for you. Would the seller use the real estate agent again or recommend them to others? 72% said definitely, and 15% said probably. Basically, 87% of sellers were happy enough to definitely or probably work with that agent or recommend them to friends and family. And on the right-hand side, we again see very high percentages of people who are recommending their agent 2, 3, 4, or more times. If I just look at 3 or 4 more times, 35%. That is a very high percentage of happy clients who are recommending them. And check this out, they're recommending them 2 times as many times as the buyers did since completing their purchase. So the average recommendations was 2, whereas with buyers, it was 1. So again, sellers not questioning the value of their agent and not upset at all about the experience that they had. And a lot of squeaky wheels out there might get a lot of news, but it is not the reality for people who actually sold last year, 9 out of 10 of whom worked with someone, a real estate professional that they knew, that they trusted, and they were very happy with the performance. All right, we've got just minutes before the wrap up here. What about the people who tried to do it on their own? The people we call for sale by owners. Believe it or not, because NAR does a survey of people who transacted, they fall into the capture data. And while we know that it's a very low level this year, they still did some deals and they responded to the survey. So let's take an in-depth look at for sale by owners. Just a couple of quick stats here that might help. Starting with just the overall volume of for sale by owners. I think we indicated this at the top of the program, but it really fell to the lowest level since 1981. 6% of people last year sold their home by themselves. And if you really look at that, 4% already knew the buyer. And I'm going to show you some more data on that in just a moment. But it's important to keep in mind the level by which people are successful as a for sale by owner really is directly related to the level of relationship to the buyer. The vast majority of for sale by owners are family deals or close friend deals. They are not deals by which someone tries to sell on their own and secures and gets a deal done with a non-familial consumer, someone they have no relationship to. So if you look at this, 4% knew the buyer, 2% did not know the buyer. Of the 6% that got it done, 90% of deals, again, were agent assisted last year. Here is the in-depth analysis of the reason that they tried want to sell on their own. So again, when we ask them, why did you want to, you would actually think that did not want to pay a commission was the number one reason, but it wasn't. It was the number two reason at 30%. The number one reason that people sold on their own is that they sold it to a relative, friend, or neighbor. So just to be clear here, FSBOs aren't selling because they're trying to save the money, number one. Yes, they still may be wanting to save the money. They may want to somehow try and not pay a real estate professional. Okay, that's understandable. But the number one reason they did it on their own is that they already knew someone. They had a family member that said, oh, you're going to relocate? I'll buy your home for you. They had a good friend. That neighbor said, if you're moving, I'd like to buy your house too, for whatever reason. The bottom line is it's not the traditional answer that most people convince themselves of. And this is also why in many cases for sale by owners ultimately end up listing with a real estate agent is that they try to sell it to a relative, friend, or neighbor, and they don't get it done. Well, 38% were motivated by that. 2 out of 3 got it done, but the rest did not. 15% contacted the seller directly. That might have been like a flipper or an investor who is working the neighborhood. We had 9% that didn't want to deal with an agent. That data is weird because it's not really specified what that means. I'm going to take it at face value, which is just they didn't wish to deal with a real estate professional or any professional. And 3%, believe it or not, the seller had a real estate license. So some of the people in the survey were actually licensed real estate agents, and they obviously represented themselves. Don't underestimate, that's still a fairly good number in terms of the very tiny number of people who did it on their own. But those are not considered agent-assisted deals. Those are considered for sale by owners. And then how they got it done, to me, this is fascinating because if it is through family, neighbors, or relatives, then basically that was their mechanism. If they knew someone who was going to buy it, then they didn't have to market it, really. They just showed it to them, or maybe they lived with them or lived next door. They used a yard sign only 12% of the time. Now, friends, let's just be clear. The yard sign is the oldest technology in the world, and still only 12% of them used it. So just think about that. They don't want to pay a commission. They don't want to deal with an agent, but it's a yard sign. It requires nothing more than a hammer, and only 12% of them actually used it. 10% were able to get it online somehow, like through a third-party aggregator or MLS, where they might have done just a flat fee entry in there. 5% did an open house. Remember, 49% of buyers said they wanted an open house as a major shopping mechanism. And then you add in all those other things, but go to the very, very bottom here, and you will notice none did not actively market the home, 63%. I cannot tell you, my friends, how many times we tell real estate agents, if you're looking for potential listings, reach out to for sale by owners. There may not be thousands of them in the marketplace. There may only be hundreds of them in the marketplace, but 63% of them are doing zero marketing, and 12% of them are even using a yard sign. Are you kidding me? That kind of opening for you to be able to have conversations around the power and benefit of appropriate marketing to bring multiple buyers in and potentially create an offer well above what they would have sold it to a family member to or a neighbor to, is this is honestly like a massively untapped area. And when we look at what for sale by owners did on their own, we see that there's a reason why they're not professionals, because they're not able to actually exercise any professional capabilities. All right, that is going to wrap up our program. First of all, it is very important for me to remind you that all of this data came from a tremendous amount of work and funding by the National Association of Realtors. So many thanks to NAR for doing this every year. It is such a big help to all of the members and professional realtors that are out there. Please go get a copy of it yourself. Thank the association for providing you this data. It's 140 plus pages, so it's really got tons more that I couldn't possibly teach you. So it's got some great insights in there on housing statistics, financing or methodologies. And cool thing is they have a lot of their past studies online as well. So if you wanted to see year over year, you could purchase a previous study. And as you saw in some of the charts, they're going to show you previous data on many of them to create trend lines anyways. But many thanks to NAR for continuing to make this available to members and to do this kind of research. It is hard work and we appreciate that. And I'm glad I've been able to share it with all of you. And thanks to all of you. I love working with all of you. I'm so grateful for your support, for being here for this program, but also on an ongoing basis, our webinars. I hope you've enjoyed it. But thank you all so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for being the professionals we need at a time like this for our industry. Keep doing great work, and we will see you all very soon.